Hello, and welcome to Chairbreakers page, and I'm Etsy. So today we're gonna be having a great conversation with my friend and one of my favorite femmes, Mary. We're just gonna talk about femme labor, feminized labor. It's probably gonna turn into us kikiing about some fool who did some bullshit to us in the past regarding our fem labor. But welcome to the page. Chairbreaker is a really good person to follow, especially if you have if you want to see folks uplifting fat bodies and acknowledging just privilege and power and positionality of like non-disabled and non-fat peoples. And yeah, they have a lot of really great perspective on a lot of really good topics. Hi everyone. Hi. But I'm about to add my friend and we can get started.
Hi,
Hi.
it's so good to see you.
Me too.
Oh,
I'm gonna move my camera a little bit. Oh, how have you been? How's your day?
I've been relaxing. So I cleaned a little bit, but then I watched a lot of Moesha today. Cause
Yo, I was literally, yeah. I've been watching Moesha too.
M to the.
It's like, what else is that? Moesha, but like,
Mhm.
yeah, no, well, first of all, I just want to introduce you to people, and this is Mary, one of my great femme friends, and maybe I don't know if you want to say a little bit about like who you are and what you do, or
Um, I think what I do, I organize from time to time, but honestly, I'm just a black fat femme trying to live usually, and
Mhm.
support the folks that I love, support the folks that um, we're in struggle together, and just working for liberation in different facets.
Right.
Yeah, and just always happy to learn from folks and always trying to have a point of, yeah, just continuous learning. Like never trying to say that I mastered a certain thing or any of that. Yeah. Black queer feminist, I guess. Yeah.
Word, word. Yeah, yeah, I really wanted to have you on here to just like, yeah, talk to you about, or, have us talk about the things that we often talk about with other people
Mhm.
or and each other. And I just put my headset in because, yeah, it was giving like a weird feedback thing.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I just want to acknowledge the land that we're on is Tongva land, and I think part of the anti-colonial kind of work that a lot of us are doing that people don't really acknowledge is that the kind of fem connections to land and production, and that doesn't necessarily, or not production as in like just like creativity, and how that can be stifled by colonization or patriarchy,
Mhm.
um and yeah, how our labor is just like commodified and not recognized at the same time. um
Mhm.
so yeah, I just wanted to discuss that, and like also just, I think people separate like conversations of like femme labor from like conversations that we can be having about colonization too. So I want to try to bridge those
Mhm.
kind of things today. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, what are you I guess like what's your take on femme and femme,
Mhm.
like how it's being used today, and how is there any like responsibility you have to this term or identity? Like, also shout out to Gafta Sabahi merch for this fun
Ooh,
bodysuit. Femme labor is not free. Meow.
yes, so
But
perfect.
yeah. yeah, but
I think with femme, and a lot of the ways I love using the word queer is that in some ways the definitions can shift depending on the person. That for me, and how, because I feel like sometimes I know what femme is not. Like I know it's not individualistic. That's how I know
mm,
what is not femme. I know it's not hierarchical. I know it's not supposed to be oppressive. And I think especially for Black femmes, the way in which that we use femme is really, really essential in destructing what does it mean to be a lot of things. But I think also destruct what does it mean to be human. Because I think in thinking about like Sadia Hartman, Horton Spillers, what they tell us about Black femmes and how our bodies are being utilized, brutalized, and made as the complete bottom for everyone else to be seen as human.
mm-hmm,
I think to
mm-hmm.
take on femme for us and to really claim it and make it our own is really powerful. So I think it still feels amorphous and like not super. Someone asked if you can pin where you got that bodysuit from. So they're looking for
Oh,
the suit.
stop. I don't even know offhand, but I will put if somebody knows Gata Salvaje's merch's uh tagline, then I can actually look it up right now. But continue.
Yeah, so I think in a lot of ways I can't necessarily describe it in very concrete terms. Like femme means you wear X, Y, and Z outfit. You wear these. You do not wear this. Like that is not the biggest concern to me per se. So I feel
Right.
like you also that just gets sticky. It gets sticky. But I do think it's interesting how femme has now become this what people think it should be a sanctuary from avoiding
Mm.
accountability. That's what I'm interested in,
Ooh.
is how when we call out the gendered ways in which we relate to one another in queer trans community, how people still are using the same oppressive gendered shit, whether it is pitting femmes against one another, whether it is
Mm.
to not be transparent about certain things, or even just like not want to be friends with someone because you're not attracted to them. That is
Mm-hmm.
gendered. And I think a lot of mass people, what I've seen over the years, is what's really frustrating is people trying to pivot away from their accountability and then be like, well, I'm a femboy. And not that there aren't femboys, but the ones who try and pivot away from accountability using that language, I'm like, but femmes are toxic too. Femmes are abusive too. And what we're naming here doesn't mean that you can escape it just because you want to claim another identity. So I think for me, that all comes to mind whenever I think about femme, like how it very much is contextualized by the racial geographic violences that people navigate, as well
Mm-hmm.
as how are people deploying it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Do you happen to have a headset by any chance or headphones? I mean, you don't need it. It's just there is a little feedback, but I
Okay.
think it's fine. I can work around it.
Okay.
Sometimes it gets distracting and I think there's like monsters.
Mm,
But
right.
yeah, I think that it what you said about like Sadia Hartman and her exploration of like what womanhood, black womanhood in the archive,
Mm-hmm.
and how she was like, all I actually found was porn. It wasn't something
Mm-hmm.
that was a humanizing like look into it. It was all gratuitous violence, all sexism, all
Mm-hmm.
um just commodified uh bodies, thingified, fungible bodies. And I think like what a lot of the different social theorists on anti-blackness try to explain and express is that slavery isn't necessarily just this era, it's
Mm-hmm.
actually a relational power dynamic that still can live on, especially when
Mm-hmm.
you have these institutions that employed these relational dynamics and how they still exist today. It's how are
Mm-hmm.
we going to get away from that when you have the police that are
Yes.
reimagined from slave patrol, or plantations reimagined from yeah, or the other way around, prisons reimagined from plantations. um
Mm-hmm.
but I think when I think about the instance of like our interpersonal dynamics and how
Mm-hmm.
they're reflected, um, from, you know, top down, and like how we learn all these relational dynamics, I feel like, yeah, no, just witnessing with you, like we've definitely witnessed in our communities, like
Mm-hmm.
immediate, like there was like a huge push for like uh the visibility of trans men,
Mm-hmm.
and then with some of the trans men that we knew, when women and femmes started having actual like whole ass analysis on how uh masculinity is
Mm-hmm.
essentially like it can be glorified and used as social currency and in a lot of ways like whiteness. um I think there was like a distancing, yeah, like you said, from that kind of privilege that people have gained from
Yeah.
being read as masculine. And like that isn't, there's like queer gay men who are masculine as hell, and like
Mm-hmm.
they don't move around in the world in the same ways that the feminine, you know, queer gay men might. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just think it's interesting how I don't know if you saw that it was a post from like Roar. I don't know if you follow them, but it's like it's kind of a lot of like riot porn, to be honest. And it might not be a cup of tea for like everybody, but like it's good to update on like just things that are happening in the world and like just police violence and like tactics and strategy, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
There was a speech that they shared by a black cis man. To my knowledge, I actually don't
Mm-hmm.
know this person's identity, but I would say that he's a black cis man only because of like talking about intersectionality and how like intersectionality is being used today. And like I agreed with his critiques on like certain aspects of Black Lives Matter activists and like how it's so connected to corporate America or growing more corporate. But
Mm-hmm.
he also dismissed um, intersectionality and said something like, well, there are more black women who are police than there are black women who are in prisons. And even with that, just that stat alone, he was just like, I want to utilizing that to dismiss the notion of intersectionality and
Damn.
aspects of identity politics. And I'm like, why?
Huh? Like, how did we get here?
Yeah, what is
Time and time again, I'm like, I hate it here because I'm like, what?
I hate it here.
Especially think about intersectionality, where it's like, what I get frustrated by is like, okay, clearly people don't understand it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the constant recirculation of it, where it gets misinterpreted, and that becomes seen as like the way to talk about it, where it's like literally intersectionality gives us the language to talk about race and gender at the same time. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like, what is the stat about Black women being, there are more Black women as police officers than in prison? Like, okay, so what do we do with that? Are, like, let's think also about what other ways Black women then are policed and surveilled and isolated that aren't always in the police, like in the jail systems. Like there are other
Mm.
ways that this happen. It's like, I don't know how you can use Black women who are incarcerated as a weapon to disregard Black feminist praxis.
Yo, I was really confused. I was like, oh, like it was like everything he was saying was dope and on point up
Mm-hmm.
until like, so you're not gonna recognize that there are social dynamics, patriarchal
Mm-hmm.
social dynamics within Black communities? Like, come
Right.
on, come now. Like
Yeah.
and when it comes to identity politics, why are you in the streets? Why are you
Right.
in the streets? You're in the streets because
Mm-hmm.
who got shot? It wasn't a white man that
Right.
got shot. It
Right.
isn't white people that are getting consistently shot, and that is an identity politic. I'm just like, why would you use this moment, this huge
Mm-hmm.
moment, to dismiss Black women's theory and struggle, and then like at the same token, like your own in so many ways. Like, I want to
Mm-hmm.
reassert class into this, and it's like, yes, we do need class. We need class.
Mm-hmm.
We need
Yeah.
class
Yeah.
analysis, and like
Yeah.
it's staunchly missing. Conversations are staunchly missing from having class analysis,
Mm-hmm.
especially within celebrity and more powerful, famous
Yeah.
people's circles.
Yes.
Um, but it was just a dismissal that I was just like, whoa, like how, especially when you
Mm-hmm.
are a Black person, like I can
Mm-hmm.
understand the refusal of gender in like a kind of way that like acknowledges, how like other people who just other anti-Black social theorists or people who study anti-Blackness acknowledge that like, yeah, we aren't gendered in the same way that like
Yeah.
non Black people are,
Yes.
considering like our relationship to slavery was uh in so many ways refuted like the same gender
Mm-hmm.
norms and gender hierarchies that they even had, because we were
Mm-hmm.
thingified, we weren't holy
Mm-hmm.
people, we were just cattle kind of thing. So I just often wonder like I've been wanting to talk to other people about like when the people who have the acknowledgement that like, oh, Black people are always gender nonconforming, what does that
Mm-hmm.
mean for our intramural as Black people, our intramural like inner like dynamics of us, like because clearly there's like Black women who are cis, and they're, like they take on these kinds of roles within our own
Mm-hmm.
communities. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your feelings are about people's like kind of dismissal of that, or like if it's like a, yeah, like how I don't know, how would you like argue against that, like how do
I
you
think what gets me about that is that we can say all that, and yes, we know that with Black folks being thingified, what does it look like when our genders aren't recognized, and how we are always failing at gender in some way when it
yes.
comes up to whiteness. And I think I wish that meant then that folks would be like, okay, let me deflect them from standard or like really binary gender norms. I'm already failing all the time by virtue of being Black. Why not just get rid of all of it? I think that's where I would like to see people go. But I think what happens for some folks, they really hold on to it in a really, I don't even know what to phrase it, but they really hold on to gender in ways that don't make sense to me. Whereas, like, but for the
Hmm.
same token, they could recognize race as at the same time a constructed category that has real consequences for people across the globe. And so we could say the same about gender. The gender, in a lot of ways, is constructed, but how we are treated differently is very much real. It's very obvious.
Hmm.
The violences you experience are not the same. When you don't toe the
Hmm.
line, it's very different, and who gets rewarded for doing certain things and who gets punished. And we know all other different ways that punishment and violence happen. So I just feel like I think sometimes I ask people why. Like, why are you holding on to this form of gender so badly when we're already
Hmm.
like, it's just what's the point? We,
Right, yeah.
we as silly as it sounds, but we always have nothing to lose. Like, really, we have a lot to gain by giving that
Hmm.
up. Because
Yeah.
especially interpersonally, like as you mentioned, with how often we had tried to call in folks, I think to contextualize it for folks watching is like how you and I have known each other for like since 2014, and
Hmm.
there's always been some masked person, whether it's year to year or month to month or week to week, that does some shit. And I
Hmm.
think it's sad that it's consistent where we have to call folks in where it is a labor that is not recognized, going back to your point about colonization and the ways in which certain labors get erased, that there's a lot of work we've done with folks to try and bring them in and try and have them be accountable. And I guess I'm wondering, like, at what point are they just going to do it? Like, at what point?
Yo, that's the other thing about this fool's talk, is that like you want to erase intersectional like feminism, or just like that isn't real. It's not real. It's made up, like people are utilizing it for pacifist reasons or whatever. I just am gagging at like, but not take being a person who I read as a man, not you're not somebody who I would like as far as this guy who was giving the
Mhm.
speech is concerned, wasn't the kind of person who I took as somebody who partook in like the feminized labor of care work, let alone
Mhm.
the emotional labor of transformative justice that I see a lot of fucking femmes kind of taking on, and
Yeah.
I'm getting fucking sick of it um
Yeah.
because it's not like this kind of like the labor of like transformative justice when we're really talking about how we need when we need it to actually um take into account our lived experiences of harm, and like there's
Mhm.
actual abuse and things do pop up, uh that like different violence and different like missteps and conflicts occur, and we want to transition away from the police state and prisons,
Mhm.
but I don't see men stepping up to do that late to perform transformative justice. Like
Yeah.
I've been saying this for years.
Yes.
So you want to throw away intersectionality without acknowledging that, like, okay, there are people in the now a lot of abolitionists, and like, I wanna acknowledge that it's not all men, but like in terms of like I do see like a lot of like uh trans gender nonconforming masculine of
Mhm.
center people taking um who are men or yeah taking up this kind of labor, but like when it comes to cis men I'm just like where y'all at, like because
I don't know where they are.
I've literally been doing this kind of like mediating fallout and
Mhm.
like trying to navigate problem, like when are y'all gonna
Mhm.
step up to handle these conflicts, because like but at the same token you're out here in these streets being like that's not real, like
Yeah.
intersectionality, like what, like we're all oppressed at this, what's class, it's actually class,
Mhm.
guys, and like it just erases entire experiences
Mhm.
that are also even more targeted by policing. Like
Mhm.
it's fascinating how people don't relate policing to gender and like policing people's
Yeah.
bodies and their like autonomy um to gender violence. It's like if somebody sees me down the street and they're like they clock me and they're like, "Oh, you're a trans person. Well, why are you wearing that? Like, are you a man? Blah blah blah."
Mhm.
Like that is that person policing another person's body because they don't fit into specific gender norms, because they think the norms is a compulsory normatives that they like think
Mhm.
that like, oh, that's the normal, this is the normal that I have, and like you are threatening my normal right now, and in so many ways uh to to prove their allegiance to the normalcy is to inflict violence on our bodies, and that's
Mhm.
the biggest issue. Like, and when I was somehow closeted years ago, part of my way of fitting in with other men who were also machismo
Mhm.
was pretending. It's like I'm pretending that I'm a sexist pig, and
Mhm.
like how how sad is that? But also like regardless of whether I believed in my rhetoric or not, I was still very much perpetuating that kind of machismo. Other people seeing it, it becomes very performative. And it's like, regardless of me believing that, like, oh yeah, I would tap that. Like, other people are, there, other people, other men were seeing that. And so it, like, kind of like, it becomes this conspiracy. It kind of affirms these kind of beliefs.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what with that, it's just like knowing how so much of that's propagated within their own circles is
Mm.
that it's so wild to me. They try and be like, well, I'm not sexist. And like, how can you ever say that though? Because we're all living in this gender society that tells us what the hierarchies of gender. Like, you cannot say that you're not. femphobic, you're not transphobic, you're not all these other things. Was like we literally live in a society that is breathing poison into us. And I wish that there was more responsibility among especially cis men, but among men and mass folks in general to try and interrupt certain things. So I just wish that they would consider what does it look like then for femmes to interrupt certain gendered just gendered harm. It's like that's scary as fuck. Especially like street harassment. Who's gonna interrupt like that? No. Like that
Right.
like
there's just so much. There's like a whole
lot.
world that this person refuted in one, like in like 2 or 3 sentences of like a 1 hour speech, and we're supposed to just like, like, you're right, intersectionality ain't shit. Like, and like I understand that liberals are co-opting intersectionality, but
Yeah.
they're co-opting everything else too. Like, like so
They're
many other
co-opting
things are
Black
being
Lives Matter.
co-opted, right, by the police, by yeah. It was really wild because street harassment is like another thing that it would be good to touch on. I want to acknowledge that like there's a lot of people um who are commenting, and like I am an introverted person. It's really hard for me to do the communication things, and I don't know if it's, like it's, I can answer questions like maybe the last 10 minutes if people want to bear with our conversation. That's cool.
Sounds
But
reasonable.
yeah. Huh?
That sounds reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. But when it comes to the street harassment, I think it's like that's a whole other world that I think a lot of trans people don't it's not really disclosed or like centered enough to acknowledge that for people who are visibly trans and gender nonconforming, going outside is a whole spiritual battle on its own. It's like it's enough, to be like a cis woman or a femme person who's designated female at birth, to leave your home and just get that kind of like harassment. But it's another thing to get that same kind of street harassment and then have the men second guess like whether their attractions is like gay or whether you're trying to trick people or like. And honestly, when it comes to trans women, people, I feel like we have to be exceptionally militant but prep ourselves. Like every time I go outside, I'm like, I'm well aware of like my the cis assumptions that I have, or passing privilege or whatever, to an extent, and but like I really do like acknowledge like, what do I wear today? Is it gonna be something hella femmy, like booty shorts, so like nobody misgenders me, or is it gonna be a little bit more like kind of femme but like conservative, so that I don't get street harassment and ergo get possibly killed because some fool can't deal with the fact that like he may have been attracted to me for a second. And that really speaks to their own kind of internalized objectification to all femmes bodies, really. But specifically, when they're like, oh, I thought you was a woman, and like, why aren't you? And that kind of thing. It's like, well, I think the cis women who collaborate with that kind of thinking, like, well, you were, who are like, well, you were tricking him and you are like, that kind of like, I wish there was more room for us to acknowledge how much our struggles are the same. In this kind of war zone, this social war that goes on outside of our houses. It's a little bit different with COVID because masks and everything, and ain't nobody trying to really touch anyone. I haven't been outside in a hot minute, maybe like a week or so.
The men are still hurt.
yeah, it's like it still happens, you know, it's still like yeah. So I don't know what your experiences with street, you don't have to like divulge like all
Mhm.
your experiences with street harassment, but like yeah, um what is your
Mhm.
experiences, and like you bring it up, like how, and
Mhm.
I've actually witnessed some interesting uh some interesting instances with you,
Mm.
and you've witnessed some interesting instances of
Yeah.
street harassment with me,
Mhm.
like it's literally like it's like war out here in these streets, and like people are actually out here trying to trivialize it, like
Mhm.
it's not a real struggle. um
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah.
because I think what I think about is there was one summer where I remember just there were so many instances of street harassment where Black
Mm,
women and femmes were just violently, yeah, just experienced a lot of violence that was really publicized, and just how frightening that was. And I think one of those summers were like, I think I kind of remember what you're talking about, where we've both been with each other when we've each experienced some sort of harassment. Is that one of the times there was, I don't know if there was a cis straight dude with us, but there was a masked person, and I don't know if the masked person said anything about
mm.
what happened. And I know like you checked in with me,
Oh.
and so I'm trying to remember who it was, but I do remember that because of the experience and because the fact I was like, well, I don't feel held by most people here, but I felt held by you. It's reminding me of
Mm,
how often do femmes have to check in on each other with this and have to like be the one sometimes to step in.
mm-hmm,
Because if I'm alone, I'm not saying shit. Like, I'm not gonna say
mm,
anything. I'm going to look at the ground. I'm gonna just ignore them or just try and keep focus on something, no matter like how persistent they get. Where it's just even a couple weeks ago, I was trying to go to the grocery store and it was a little hot, so I wore a tank top. I was like, it's just too hot, in California sometimes. And like, I am literally just in the store to grab some chicken, and I'm getting harassed by like three dudes. Like,
mm-hmm.
just think about how that's a reality that so many folks face, and especially for trans women and femmes, like how it's even more heightened when the threat of death is very much around the corner for a lot of folks. Like, it's just sometimes it's astounding to me that people don't recognize just how much like women and femmes deal from day to day, just from, as you said, stepping out of your door. Like, that is a reality
Oh,
about
that's
that.
part of the labor. That's part of our
Yeah.
labor, is like the literal work we have to do, in order to live,
Yeah.
or in order to survive even within our own communities. It's like
Mhm.
there's not only the police that we're having to worry about, but it's the labor of like, okay, well, even in my own, even around like non-police, they're still like, yeah,
Mhm.
like the other pig, and like
Mhm.
they're having us having to like manage ourselves consistently, and like just around like the impositions or the harassment is like its own, it's
Mhm.
work. And that's another thing that like I think that should be highlighted, that like, like I just,
Mhm.
there there's a lot of instances where like yeah, when you said that there was that, I don't remember who that person was exactly, um but it is hard to actually confront that real time, especially if you're alone. And like I really
Mhm.
appreciate certain groups like survival arts, or different like self-defense
Mhm.
groups, or people who
Mhm.
encourage like um carrying a weapon. Like it's
Yeah.
2020, like
Yeah.
unfortunately we have to consider that. Like I've had like
Mhm.
people try to check in with me and be like, I would want to like carry a weapon around, but that's just
Mhm.
too much spiritual weight to hold. And I'm like,
Mhm.
who has the privilege to not have that spiritual weight on that? Like, who has the privilege to go
Well,
outside and not have to think about in their heads, like,
right.
am I gonna have to fight somebody today because my gender offends them, or like, because they're, they're a dude bro, or they're sexist or whatnot. So yeah, it is a lot to process, and I think that that is also part the constant having to maneuvering and manage around people's lack of care and lack of
Yeah.
thoughtfulness around how they affect the spaces they affect. It's just like extra. It's just extra from like the just spreading your legs like on the bus or something, like taking up that kind of space when like you can manage it. I've seen like so many people try to manage themselves around like people who don't need that, amount of space. And
Yeah.
it's usually, unfortunately, men, and like unfortunately we get into the conversation of socialized as like a specific gender, which like that's a whole other topic. But yeah, I think I guess I want to maybe take some look at some comments on this. Yeah, if you have any too, feel free to chime in. Yeah, I get so distracted by these comments. Anyway, but yeah, I did want to like just encourage other people who are watching who aren't don't identify as femme or feminine, acknowledging that I think like I have seen a lot of like femmes and women, trans and cis, uh really have to maneuver a lot. I feel like I'm currently still maneuvering a lot on what little connections to cis hetero men that I do have. And I don't really have that many, y'all. Like, that's really bad. That's bad that this isn't seen as like work. And that's another thing, like femme labor isn't really seen as like something that qualifies as like actual, like, as something that's needed or necessary. It's so invisibilized.
Yeah, when you said it doesn't qualify as work, and maybe even think about how we're always expected to be on then. So like if it's not work, it's not labor, so we could just do it at any point. And you don't ever need breaks to do the labor that you do. You don't ever need support in it. And just thinking about, especially thinking about you, like how many accountability processes that have you been through? Like as someone who's mediating, as someone who's trying to hold someone accountable. And I know there are some men, some mass folks who are part of it, but like at least in my circles, like I don't know any. I don't know who's engaging in that work. And anytime I've seen an issue come up, it's been the femmes that I see who step up or who are called on to do that work. So I think in all different levels, I think sometimes when we talk about femme labor, people only localize it to like street harassment or sex or dating. And it's like, yeah, those facets absolutely matter for sure, but it's everywhere. And I think that's what I would want folks to take away, that it's absolutely everywhere. The ways in which femme labor gets delegitimized. It's in our friendships when people don't see the ways in which someone can make you feel comfortable. Like that's labor. Like care is work. It's not supposed to be transactional. But I would just hope that people also think, you know what, I can take this up to then because I want to care for folks, or I want to see a world where not only like a certain percentage of the group is doing all this work that's sustaining us and living, but they're not being sustained in their own life too.
Yeah, I mean, some people would probably be like, well, it's how you were raised, like, but I'm like, no, like, even in instances where you have like the nuclear parent, like situation, I've just really witnessed a lot of people internalize like this lack of care. And it's definitely not always men. But yeah, I think I remember a video that you posted or that you were in a while ago where you talked about, you know, femme labor isn't just like, it's not just like an identity, it takes praxis, it takes
Mhm.
actual doing, and it's not even something that, you know, and if we're looking at other countries or cultures that are inherently kind of patriarchal, I think that will often, or that not inherently patriarchal, but have been affected by patriarchy, you'll
Mhm.
probably see those same dynamics. You do
Mhm.
see those
Yeah.
same dynamics played out because
Mhm.
it's systemic. It surpasses like language, class, cultural lines. So I think what you were talking about in regard to like how, yeah, how it isn't just like this kind of like sheer identity. It actually it must it's like you can identify as like femme, and like I've seen a lot of people do that. They're like, oh, I'm femme and blah blah blah. And like I'm like, but we're always like side-eyeing those people like, but where? Like, but how?
Somewhere.
But how is that?
Like, do
Where?
this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciate you bringing that up because, like, absolutely think about community. It's just like, maybe for me, there are distinctions. Not maybe, there are for me distinctions, I guess, between femmes of color and non femmes of color, like white people. um,
Mm,
excuse me. But also, I think, I guess I'm thinking about in spaces of just even being around other folks of color, like how Black femmes and have to navigate those spaces, even
mm.
like, because we know not to trust other folks like white people. And I know,
Sorry.
like, you
No, no,
know,
no. It's true. We can't wholly do
and
that.
and then with non-Black femmes, it's like, yes, we still have community. Yes, we have strong friendships. Yes, we have all these different relations that are amazing. But there still is the part though where I'm like, but you all still see don't see Black femme labor, or you expect Black femme labor without calling it as such. And I guess I'm thinking about sometimes even how the phrase trust Black femmes sometimes ends up meaning trust Black femmes, don't do your own work. Like, it's a
Mm,
full phrase to me where it's like, yeah, trust Black femmes as we go through shit, but also please do your own work.
right.
Please do the unlearning. Talk to your community. You do the work. Don't try and just be like, a Black femme is not going to save us all because they're either in this leadership role as a director of some organization, or we know the top cop of California is going to be the vice president. Like, I think it goes a lot of different ways that's fucked up, whether it's like you don't do your own work or you start just endorsing every single person who is Black so you don't have to question it either. Which
Right.
I don't know if that's like another conversation we could have at a different point, just you and me or something, but it feels like a lot of pressure, honestly, where it's like, yeah, Black feminist praxis has been oftentimes the ways in which liberation has happened, but also we won't carry everyone, is where I feel.
Mm, can't, shouldn't really,
Mhm.
considering how often Black people have had to attach themselves to other like struggles to be wholly seen, or like,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
historically how like even in the Black Power movement there was quite a lot of um yeah, sexism, outright sexism, outright rape, and
Yeah.
machismo, and women having to be like, you're not gonna be calling us bitches like today,
Mhm. Mhm.
like we'll call ourselves whatever we want, but today, like, and
Yeah.
now on, you're not calling us out of our names,
Mhm.
and yeah, like how when we think about the Black Power movement, or even Black radical traditions,
Mm-hmm.
which like it's Black August right now, and like
Yes.
I really want to highlight the necessity of Black revolutionaries and like how August was started. It was started in prisons, specifically from Black revolutionaries to be able to honor their ancestors' struggles,
Mm-hmm.
from yeah, Jonathan Jackson to George Jackson, a lot of people in the
Mm-hmm.
Panthers who are still even incarcerated to this day, who honor Black August by either fasting,
Mm-hmm.
rigorous study, or you know, in finding some way to honor the month and the ancestors. But so much of that is very much, it's not really centered on Black women,
Mm-hmm.
on Black femmes,
Yes.
Black queer and trans, our
Yes.
stories that have been completely erased,
Mm-hmm.
which is why, like, even though like I have been invited with open arms to some of these like spaces, I have taken quite the step back, away from them and out of them, because um just like hearing often, whenever like my the issue of like my gender or struggles with gender
Mm-hmm.
and like sexism, transphobia, machismo come up, like people like it's always, people are so quick to um yeah, like I said, trivialize or make light of um that kind of struggle, and they'll be like, oh
Mm-hmm.
well, I see like Etsy as like a great comrade and when it comes to the police, but all the other shit is like, and it's like, well, if you can't see that, if
Mm-hmm.
you don't see that our struggles are intrinsically linked as
Mm-hmm.
Black folks, even at, you know, like I'm really trying to build solidarity right now with between Black and Indigenous peoples, because I really think like that is, you know, that is a future that I can see, that is actually a past that
Mm-hmm.
has happened. I
Mm-hmm.
recently read this book, Black Indians, by
Mm-hmm.
some white dude. I don't remember his name. It was a good book, but it just had all of these accounts of actual long like histories of Maroons, Salish, different kinds of indigenous people collaborating with former slaves, current slave, recently
Mm-hmm.
broke out, you know, slaves, and like
Mm-hmm.
and Black folks. And I just think that's so important. But what makes it hard is when they're not having conversations like these. Like, let's talk about feminized labor that now,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or let's talk about gender nonconforming queer and trans two-spirit peoples. Like,
Mm-hmm.
can we talk about that? Because
Mm-hmm.
we've kind of led the way in terms of
Yeah.
mutual aid that we needed to do, because y'all kicked us to the curb in the
Mm-hmm.
for centuries, when you thought that there was only two genders and the roles that we were um gender you were performing was like the only kind of like way, the only truth.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, went on a rant.
And I
But
think I mean, it's related though, because it's just thinking about and knowing your experiences in different spaces, also witnessing in different spaces
hmm
what you've been through, just thinking about in the most recent Black liberation movement that's happening, just of like que- queer and trans folks, especially trans women experiences, were not being held.
no.
And when that was being called into the space of like, this is happening, this is also part of our violences that we deal with when it comes to carceral logics of the state, how that got sidelined, how, and even in spite of all of that, still being texted something like, hey, we could use you. Like, Where it's like this
Mm.
language of being of using and of this and that, it's like, so you still see the value of someone, but only as far as their labor takes you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that needs to really be questioned. Like, why is it that like people are so willing to use someone to at any point they see fit, or just not care for that person, but cannot also hold, okay, we need to destruct then all these different ideologies that we're holding as true that's been force fed to us. That these literally
Yes.
are histories, or they aren't our origins of gender, they are our origins on sexuality, on religion, in so many ways, when it's just like these aren't the histories. But a lot of people see this as psyops, I guess, when we talk about Black, queer, and trans experiences in Black
Mm.
liberation, where it's like, no, literally,
That's just
no.
master. That's just massa.
It's like,
That's a massa. That's not
but
that's
no, I
not in
don't.
Africa. Like all of Africa, none of Africa had any queer people, y'all, historically.
Right,
Like it just didn't.
right.
It was
And it's like
all.
seeing the ways in which slavery had a particular aim of increasing population of Black folks. It's like, I don't think queerness is seen as like something that's part of their lexicon of like, yes, this is part of our tools of destructing Blackness. Like,
Mm-mm.
I don't think so. To thinkify it doesn't mean that they want to give sexuality either, or gender at all.
Mm.
So it's just like, no, the bigger it's just people are not asking the right questions and aren't attending to the actual people in front of them. Where it's like, this is violent to say that we're not going to include trans folks facing violence from the police, from interpersonal, knowing what we know about Black trans women and life expectancies for folks. Like, knowing all that, that's
Mhm,
violent.
mhm.
It's absolutely violent. And I think that people don't name it as such in a really awful way, but it insulates them from harm to not name
Mm.
it and to not address it.
I think I often acknowledge that as somebody that delves into the want of abolishing policing is a want of, when I say abolish policing, what I mean is like abolishing the very the notion of telling people, like, policing how people are to live their lives.
Mm-hmm.
um and I think of all of like the kind of solidarity work that I have done with people who have literally been targeted by police violence, whether they were arrested or
Mm-hmm.
had like a family member that was killed. I don't think anyone's really reached out and been like, "Hey, Edsy, we see that like the
Mm-hmm.
policing that we have learned, that our society have learned from the state, and the kind of criminalization and demonization of trans women, and trans people, gender nonconforming peoples, affected and socialized us into actually being transphobic, is like literally affecting, that policing is affecting your daily life, and um we want to do something about it. It's like it's so separate. It becomes so separate, and I'm like, why can't we acknowledge that like these are the kind of law and order that was in place, um that reared and steered us towards transphobia, sexism, all of that stuff is like, it's all related to each other. And why aren't we like rapidly responding in the same ways? It's like, there have been trans women that have been murdered by police as well, trans men that have been murdered by the police. Well, in the like instance of all of these Black people across the US that have been killed in the last like 2 months since uprising started, like, yeah, I don't want to believe that it's only Black cis hetero men that are only killing out here in these streets, killing Black trans women. I want to acknowledge that, yeah, like cis uh cops, cis hetero men cops have their own uh weird infatuation with trans women and trans feminine people's bodies, and that they too are also responsible for um genociding, probably more responsible for genociding us, because they can get away with it easier. They
Yeah.
can, they're not going to um investigate those kinds of they're just not, especially if there's like they're sex workers, especially if they're trans, especially if they're black, like they're not, they haven't historically thought enough about us to like investigate. So I'm like always like, I don't want, I don't need there to be investigation. I need there to be social transformation among all of us. And but like that's going to require confrontations with the state that delegitimize them, and also autonomous direct actions and mutual aid that does the same thing but is oppositional to their power and their imposing of their will and law and order upon us.
Yes, it requires a complete disavowal of this society that we've been socialized into. Which I think is why I think seeing then how certain spaces, whether it be like Black liberation spaces, actually I think that's where I primarily think about, because that's where the only spaces where I will willingly engage with street people, at least, is that I don't think people really understand when we call for liberation, we don't want just to be at the top. We don't want to be the new rulers or the new oppressors or have a piece of this pie or the seat at the table. We want to end to this world as we see that's operating currently.
Right.
And people think like, oh no, but I've worked so hard in this space, like in this way of being socialized. And it's like, we have to be willing to give up a lot. I mean, because we're going to gain more. We're going to gain freedom by giving that up. And I think, yeah, especially with gender, where it's just knowing, just of course, like knowing what we know and then seeing how violence happens, it's just, I wish there was more of folks actually wanting to engage in that, of letting go of what they think about gender, of knowing that we have to think about this as part of our liberation as well. That how can you not see policing within this in yourself? Like, it's all policing.
Right. Yeah. I don't understand. I want to give the last 3 minutes to anyone that has any like questions for us or comments that we can respond to. I haven't been good at doing that in all of the lives that I've done.
I think so far we've been
getting,
just so far we've mostly been getting, like affirmative comments, like really interesting viewpoints.
I'm not even seeing them anymore. Oh, maybe I'm at the bottom, or oh no, that was okay. Well, yeah, thanks for chatting with me. I think we only have like roughly 2 or 3 minutes left. But I really appreciate you and like how you've just always talked the talk and walked the walk, and like how it's really been affirming just having like other Black femmes and in spaces that are so, you know, that have been so much weight and like on our spirits and our yeah, I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you.
I appreciate you. Yeah. Since day one, when we became friends after
are you gonna
just that moment, like, this is happening. We're looking at each other and be like, is this really going down?
I think that was like, for me, that was I've never felt more earnestly at ease with somebody else experiencing some fuck shit going on. Because, like, to give it this story context, there's a famous scholar, a famous scholar, I have like 1 minute, who, people were like fighting over how much they knew this scholar, and then, yeah, there was this shade thrown or whatever, and then we just kind of shot each other like a look, like, is this happening? Like, it was so much in that look. I just will always remember. We're like, oh shit, like,
it's happening.
This is gonna happen.
Yep, and especially the combo was on gender too, so it's just, it feels full circle to like to have this convo publicly. And I just want to say, y'all should donate to Etsy. They're doing a lot of work with these lives, especially we see how people have let Black Lives Matter become a hashtag that's a trend that is trending, as opposed to always wanting to put that work in all the time. And part of that is supporting.
Oh shit! We only have 10 seconds, and it cuts off in like 10 seconds. But I'm sorry.
Okay, pay Etsy. That's all I'm gonna say.
See you later. Bye. Stay dangerous, y'all.
Bye.